Hey, good morning. How is everyone doing? Today we're going to have a look at part 7, reading gap text. Okay, it seems that quite a lot of people find this particular part difficult, so we're going to go through a whole question, looking at the answers, the reasons why. Okay, so hopefully then you can take that next time you do a reading activity like this, you know what to do, and you'll get some good results. Okay, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon. Okay, so let's get straight to it. Okay, so here we are with a question from part 7 reading. Okay, if you're new to this sort of activity, you are going to get a text like this, and there will be 6 gaps which you will need to fill. Okay, and you will fill these gaps with the options that you have here. Okay, the only problem is you've got 7 options and you've got 6 gaps. Okay, so one that you're not going to need to use. Okay, so you'll need to sort of think carefully about what is going to go in each gap, obviously, to get all the right, to get the points. Okay, this part of the exam is quite important because it represents 2 points for each question. Okay, you need to think carefully in the reading part of the exam with regards to the time that you have, okay, and the amount of points that you can get for each question. Okay, so each of these gaps here is worth 2 points each. Okay, so it is definitely worth having a look through the beginning, okay, the introduction, okay, because that will give you information about what the text is about, okay. So let's have a quick look through here and see if we can answer some questions about what goes in the gaps, okay. So Macquarie Island, okay. Journalist Matthew Denholm joins a group of scientists attempting to save Macquarie Island, which lies halfway between Australia and Antarctica. Okay, so we know it's about this island. We know it is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. In between Australia and Antarctica is not very much, apart from this particular island. Okay, so isolation might well be a sort of theme for this particular text. Okay, now what I would suggest here in answering here for 41 is that you sort of read through this here, okay, and understand what it says, and also read through here and understand what it says afterwards, okay. And what you're trying to look for here is a sort of connection sort of before and maybe also a connection afterwards, and so that the gap text that you put in here will connect before and perhaps connect afterwards. So let's have a quick read through, see what it says. I'm stumbling, blinded by tiny missiles of ice and snow, driven horizontally into my face by a howling gale. 1 minute I'm blown backwards, the next I'm leaping skyward in an undignified panic as a foot narrowly misses an outraged elephant seal. Squinting painfully through torchlight, I've little hope of seeing the beasts. Okay, so there's a number of different elements that we can sort of think about here. Weather is definitely one element. Okay, we can see here we've got ice, we've got snow, and we've also got gale, okay, which is a very strong wind in English, okay. So we can see here that weather is important, okay. You can also see here, for example, it is such a strong wind that he's blown backwards, okay, so that gives you an idea of the strength of the wind, okay. Then he says here, the next, I'm leaping forward, skyward in undignified panic. Okay, so leap is another way of saying to jump. Okay, why is he jumping? Well, he misses an elephant seal. Okay, and it looks like the elephant seal is not very happy because we have this word here, outraged, which gives you anger. Okay, so he's obviously sort of walking through quite a few of these different animals, okay? The weather is important here. And then to make things even worse, it looks like it's at night, okay? Because we can see here, he's using a torch, okay? So the only way that he can see these beasts, as he refers to them, is using a torch. So we've got weather, cold, wind, trying not to step on these animals, and it's dark, okay? Right, okay, let's read a little bit after the space and see what it says here. Later, inside a cozy hut, sporting a patch over the sore of my eyes, I have to admit that it probably is. This is, after all, the sub-Antarctic, or to be precise, Macquarie Island, a sliver of land conjured abruptly from the vast wilderness of the Southern Ocean. Okay, so let's look and see what's important here. Right, later is important, okay, because obviously it's sort of, this is what happens before, and this is perhaps 2 or 3 hours after this particular excerpt here. So again, this may well have bearing on what goes in 41, okay. We can see that he is inside, okay, he's not, obviously not outside, which is what we're talking about here, and he's in the hut. It's like a small house, okay, and he's got a patch over his eyes, okay, so perhaps because of the sort of missiles of ice and snow, the strong winds, he's got a problem with his eyes, okay, and then we have a very curious sentence, this part here. I have to admit that it probably is. Probably is what, you would ask, okay? So I would say that whatever goes in 41 is probably going to be the question, and this might well be the answer, okay? And then he says here as well, this, after all, the sub-Antarctic. So again, this is, and this perhaps is here as well, may well be related to something he says here. Okay, right. Okay, so let's look at our options that we have to. So in the beginning here, it is definitely worth reading through each of the different options. Okay, we've got from A to G, and it's worth going through just to see what each one is about. Then you sort of have to think about, well, which one is going to fit in the space. So let's just go through very quickly and try and figure out what goes, what each one's about, and perhaps is it going to go in our space in 41. So let's look at A. This is mainly in the form of rabbits, introduced in 1877 as a food source. They took to the island with gusto. Recent estimates of the rabbit population before the eradication program began range from 100,000 to 150,000. So we can see here A is pretty much about rabbits, okay? And the rabbits were introduced at this date as a source of food. Perhaps there were people staying there, they needed some source of food. And it looks like the rabbits were really quite happy because we have this word here, gusto or gusto, okay? And we can see as well that the number of rabbits on the island, we can see here is quite a lot, okay? So if you're going through each of these, what I would recommend, if you're doing paper-based, actually write on the side here, rabbits, okay, because this is obviously about rabbits, okay, and in the text you would need to try and find something that would sort of have bearing with this topic of rabbits, okay. At the moment, I think we can probably say this is not going to fit in 41 because we have no mention before the gap and after the gap to rabbits, okay. We have mention of other animals, a seal, but this is not going to be relevant to what we have here, okay. Let's just quickly read through B as well. It's a realization that makes all the more impressive the endeavors of the first explorers to come here. Here at Brothers Point, perched on a headland off the island's east coast, we could be the last humans on Earth. In a geographical sense, we very nearly are. Okay, so again, what is this about? We could probably say here that it may well be about the island that they're on, this Macquarie Island. The Brothers Point, it looks like a part of this island, okay? We can see it's on the east coast of this island, okay? And we've got this sense here of sort of isolation because we have this sentence here. We could be the last humans on Earth, okay? Perhaps he sort of, the writer has this sort of feeling that he's so far from anyone else that he has this feeling, okay? And then he says here, in a geographical sense, we very nearly are. So this question of isolation perhaps is important. And then we've got this question here at the beginning. It's a realization that makes all the more impressive the endeavors. Endeavors are what you do, and they tend to be sort of things which are really quite difficult, okay? And that the first explorers, when they came to this island, probably had sort of difficulties, okay? And maybe he's impressed by these difficulties because he's on this island having sort of problems of himself, okay? So again, I don't think this is going to go here in 41. Okay, maybe later on we can sort of find something here that's relevant to this part here, but at the moment, I don't think this is going to fit. Okay, let's look at C. The walk just under 10 kilometers from the research station to the cabin wasn't meant to be in darkness. Sometime after setting out, however, my photographer realized he had left a piece of camera equipment behind. Okay, so there are some things here that sort of might be important. We've got this question about darkness, which we had mentioned before with the torchlight. Okay, so that may well be something to consider. We've got a walk, which looks like it's from 10 kilometers from the research station where perhaps they do the work to the cabin. Cabin could be another word for hut. Okay, this could be another sort of connection that we might sort of think about. And then again here, it says sometime after setting out, my photographer realized he'd left a piece of camera equipment behind. So it looks like someone sort of made a mistake and they've had to go back and pick up this lens, tripod, or wherever. Okay. Does this fit in here for 41? I don't think so. Okay, we have some information about walking from here to here, but the sentence here wasn't meant to be in darkness. You get the impression that this happened before in the past, and if we look here in how this is written at the moment. He's talking about what's happening at the moment, leaping skywards. Okay, little hope of seeing. It looks like he's talking about what's going on now. Okay, and 40, and so this part here is really referring to what happened before in the past. Okay, so I think probably we could say C doesn't fit either. Okay, let's talk a little bit about D. What does it say here? It's one of the most ambitious programs of its type ever attempted. A worthy project indeed, but as the intense winds rage outside, I can empathize with Captain Douglas, an early visitor to the island. Arriving in 1822, Douglas called Macquarie the most wretched place. Okay, let's look at some things here. My question would be, what is the most ambitious program? Okay, and if it's one of the most, okay, we're going to probably talk about others. Okay, so we would need to identify this information. Okay, it goes on to talk about a worthy project. Okay, so perhaps it's a project that's a good idea. Okay, we've got information here about winds. Okay, which we had previously in our text when it talked about gales. Okay, that would definitely fit with intense winds. Okay, and then he says he can sort of empathize with Captain Douglas, who referred to it as the most wretched place. Wretched places are places that you don't want to go to. Okay, maybe because of the wind, maybe because of the isolation, etc. So again, I don't think this is going to fit into our space in 41. We have no mention of a program. Okay, and there's no real talk here about the sort of wretched place. It doesn't sound a pleasant place, but it doesn't really sort of connect here with what we've got after the text. Okay, so again, maybe later on they talk about some sort of program, etc., and we perhaps have something. We have some sort of relevance to this expression here, a wretched place. Okay, so we can see here that it's not going to be A, B, C, or D in 41. Okay, let's read through E and see what happens. The resultant landslips have devastating consequences. They have harmed hundreds of penguins as well as destroying nesting sites, leaving local wildlife at risk. I begin to realize just how damaged this wilderness is. Okay, landslips is another word for landslide. Okay, so we're talking about the geography of the island and land sort of moving perhaps of rain because of the rain, and causing sort of great problems. Okay, we've got devastating consequences, damaging the wilderness, okay, destroying sort of nesting sites for the birds, leaving wildlife at risk. Okay, so this looks a bit more about geography of the island, things that might have happened. Okay, and again, at the moment, that doesn't seem to be where we are in the text. Okay, let's move on to read F. At night, they are indistinguishable from the rocks that cover the ground. Only the gurgling barks tell me when to jump. As I lose feelings in my fingers, numbed by glacial temperatures, I ask myself, is this what I sailed to the bottom of the world for? Right, okay, so there are a couple of questions we want to answer here. He talks about they, he talks about their, okay? So we would need to identify these 2 points. What does they refer to? Is it people? Is it something? Is it animals? Okay. We have information here about the weather because he talks about losing fingers in his, losing feeling in his fingers, the glacial temperature. So we can see it's very cold. Okay. And then we've got this question here at the end. Is this what I sailed to the bottom of the world for? Well, then maybe here they could well refer to our elephant seals, okay? If we go back, we have this sentence here, squinting painfully through torchlight, I've little hope of seeing the beasts, okay? And the beasts here refer back to the elephant seal, okay? And this may well fit with they and their. Okay, if they're indistinguishable from the rocks, probably it's because he can't see very well. Okay, and if it's nighttime and he's using a torch, they're going to be difficult to sort of find on the ground. Okay, so that sort of may well help us as well. He then talks about jumping. Okay, we had reference to this before because we had him leaping skyward. So we've got quite a few things here which are starting to sort of connect together, okay? And then we've got the question here at the end. Is this what I traveled or sailed to the bottom of the world for? So in the question here about sort of these problems with the animals, the really sort of low temperatures, is this what he traveled to the bottom of the world for? And perhaps this fits now with our sentence here. I have to admit that it probably is. Okay, so now perhaps we have here an answer to a question that fits here. Okay, and I would say that F looks a very good candidate for going to 41. I would suggest that we read G as well, just to make sure, but we've got a lot of connections here before the text and after the text to give us the answer here for F. Okay, so let's just read through G. Macquarie achieved the listing 10 years earlier, partly in recognition of the fact that it is a geological freak. The island is ocean floor, forced to the surface by the convergence of 2 tectonic plates, an ongoing process. So again, this is quite similar to E, and it talks about the geography. Okay, we can see here that the island was essentially at the bottom of the ocean. Okay, and it was forced to the surface by this geographical movement of tectonic plates. Okay, again, in the part of the text we're not really talking about geography, we're talking about what he's doing. Okay, so I would say here that we're going to have to choose F as our answer here for 41. Okay, it fits with all the information here we've got with they and their. We've got reference to sort of the temperatures that he talked about. Jumping we had as well, there's reference to that as well, and we've got an answer to our question here, why he traveled to the bottom of the world. Okay, so F definitely fits in here. Okay, okay, let's move on. The darkest, coldest months are generally the quietest time of year for human activity here, but this year is different. I'm with a team of scientists who are undertaking a seemingly impossible task: to read the entire island of every rabbit, rat, and mouse. Okay, let's just read a little bit more afterwards. Next morning, I abruptly changed my mind, however, when I awake to a view that justifies the 3-day voyage to this remote outpost of Australia. After overnight snowfalls, the island is painted white, from highland plateaus with frozen lakes to rocky black sand and pebbled shore. All glistens in rare sub-Antarctic sunshine. Okay, so we've got this question here that it's normally at this sort of time of winter, in the time of the year, which is winter, a very quiet place, okay? But that this year is different, okay? And that this year there is a team of scientists, okay? And they've got a task to get rid of, to eradicate, to eliminate from the island, all rabbits, rats, and mice. Okay, so this is perhaps going to be important. And then as well, we've got another sort of expression here to refer to time, a bit like we had with later, next morning, that he changes his mind, however. Okay, so again, whatever was in here in 42 perhaps has relevance to what happened when he changed his mind. Why did he change his mind? Okay, and it looks like he changed his mind because of the view from where he is. Okay, and the winter snowfall here has turned the place into perhaps quite a pleasant place to look at. Okay, so this may well be important here for this part, and we definitely need to perhaps find some information about these scientists and what they're doing. Okay, so let's look at our options and see if we can figure out what goes here. Right, A, if you remember, we talked about was about rabbits. Okay, it does talk about rabbits here. We do have mention of that. Okay, but it doesn't really fit for this sentence here. This is mainly in the form of rabbits. Okay, if we go back and put this into the space here, it's not really going to fit. The scientists have got a task. They want to get rid of these animals. And the first sentence would be, this is mainly in the form of rabbits. Well, that doesn't make sense. Okay, so we can say here, A is not going to be the answer. Okay, B, we had about this, we had this question here about these endeavors, these things that these travelers were doing. We said that they were difficult, perhaps because of the weather, perhaps because of isolation. And we had this question here as well at the end about this question of isolation. At the moment, that's not going to fit here. When we're trying to find information about scientists and their task, what they're doing, and this change of mind by the author. Okay, that doesn't really fit here. So A and B, no. C, we've got this question about a walk. It was in darkness and because of someone making a mistake. Okay, again, there's no reference to a team and there's no reference here to a changing of someone's mind. Okay, let's look at D, the most ambitious program of its type, a worthy project. Okay, so this may well be a possibility. Okay, because we could definitely sort of say that one of the most ambitious programs of its type could well fit with this sentence here when he talks about a seemingly impossible task. Okay, getting rid of these animals from the island. Okay, this could well fit now with this ambitious program because it does sound very ambitious. If you think about getting rid of these animals from an island, I would say that that's going to be sort of fairly ambitious. Okay, then perhaps here at the end, we've got this question here about Captain Douglas, who referred to the place as a wretched place. Okay, and that the author agrees with this thought. Okay, now this will definitely fit now with our change of mind when he says here, next morning I abruptly changed my mind. So here he's thinking it's a wretched place, a horrible place. He doesn't want to be there. But the next morning, because of the snow, he changes his mind. Okay, the view now of the snow across the plateaus, the lakes, the black sands and Pebble Shore is something completely different. And this is why he changes his mind. Okay, so now here in 42, we've got a link here to a scientist of what they're doing. We've got a link here to why he changed his mind. Okay, and 42, I would say, definitely fits in here with D. So let's carry on. Let's read a little bit more. Besides the previous afternoon's discomforts were entirely our own fault. Okay, so here we can see there was some sort of problem. Okay, discomforts here is definitely going to be a problem. Okay, and that the problem was their fault. Okay, they made a mistake. Okay, let's read afterwards to the space here in 43. The delay while we doubled back made it impossible to reach the hut before dusk. I had also blundered, deciding snow goggles were unnecessary. We have been taught a valuable lesson. While officially part of Australia, this island is a different world. Okay, so we got some sort of problem that happens here, and the problem caused discomfort. It caused them to perhaps feel cold or whatever it might be. Discomforts would sort of fit with that. Okay, there is a question here about a delay. Okay, so it took them more time than they thought. They had to double back. So to double back means to return to a place. Okay, and we've got the question here that they went back to the hut. Okay, before dusk. Dusk is what happens when the sun sets. Okay, so in the sort of European sort of time scale, it will be sort of perhaps 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. Perhaps where they are, that may well be a different time. Okay, but they're having to walk back to the hut before this time here, and it looks like it's not going to be possible. Okay, so they're basically going to return back to the hut in the darkness. Okay, blundered again gives you this question about making a mistake. Okay, if it's your fault, it means you've done something wrong. You've made a mistake. Okay, and blundered is going to fit well with this. Okay, so let's see what we can decide here. Right, A, we can say no because it's about rabbits, and there's nothing really here that says a mistake was made. Okay, B, we've got this question here about things that the earlier explorers did, that these endeavors, challenges were sort of really quite difficult. And there's something more about isolation. So at the moment, I don't think this is going to fit. Okay. C was about a walk, 10 kilometers from the research station to the cabin. Wasn't meant to be in darkness. So this may well be a possibility. Okay, because that's now fitting in with our time scale of dusk. Okay, and now we can see here that we've got this question about someone making a mistake. Okay, and the mistake was the photographer left a piece of camera equipment behind. So we have perhaps here connection to what happens before and some sort of connection here to afterwards. And I would say this is a good candidate for the space here in 43. If you remember, E was about the geography and the movement of the land destroying the wilderness. Okay, so that doesn't really fit here as well. F we've already answered. And G talks about this, how the island was formed, that it was formed by the tectonic plates. Okay, so I would have to say that C definitely works here. Okay, the walk just under 10 kilometers from the research station to the cabin wasn't meant to be in darkness. This is going to fit well because it was their fault. Okay, the delay, having to do this, having to go back and pick up the camera equipment, going back to the hut, the cabin, okay, makes it almost impossible to reach the hut before dusk. That's going to fit with our sentence here when he talks about darkness. Okay, so C absolutely fits here for 43. Okay. Okay, let's read on and see if we can finish off the last three. What have we got here? We have been taught a valuable lesson. While officially part of Australia, this island is a different world. Different rules apply. Every move must be planned and precautions taken because of the dangers posed by climate and terrain. Okay, let's read afterwards as well. This extreme isolation means no activity is easy on the island. Our first challenge was getting ashore as there is no safe anchorage. But when we eventually reached the beach, I could instantly see that the island's reputation as the Galapagos of the South is justified. Okay, so what have we got here to try and help us with the space? Okay, so we can see here that where they are is a different world. Okay, different rules apply. Okay, perhaps you need planning, perhaps you need to take precautions. Okay, and you need to take these precautions and plan well because there are dangers. Okay, dangers from the weather and dangers from the geography. Okay, so we do know that in our options we do have different parts that talked about geography. okay? But perhaps you also need to find something as well that talks about dangers, okay? And then as well, we've got this question about isolation, okay? So perhaps this is going to be important to choose what goes in 44. So let's see if we can figure out what happens. A, we can say no, because that's nothing really relevant to the rabbits, okay? What else have we got here? We've got B, okay? It's a realization that makes all the more impressive the endeavors of the first explorers to come here. Right, so endeavors, we talked about things which were problematical, things which were difficult, okay? We've definitely got something here at the end that can be important because of this sentence here about being the last humans. Okay, that may well fit in the question about isolation. So I would say that B is a possible contender, but let's check the others. C, we've answered. D, we've answered. F, we've answered. E and G, we talked about as the sort of parts of the text to do with the geography. And it was these movements of the lands devastating the wildlife, damaging the wilderness, okay? And that G was about the sort of formation of the islands and how it was formed, okay? So let's just go back a little bit and see if we can sort of find some more information. Every move must be planned, precautions taken because of dangers posed by climate and terrain, okay? Now, will that fit here with B? It's a realization. Well, the realization could well be this question of danger, okay, and the danger posed by the climate and terrain, okay? So he's sort of thinking about this, realizing this, it's a dangerous place, and then sort of making the connection that when these first explorers came, that these things that they were doing, their endeavors were even more difficult, and this will give you impressive, okay? So this could well be a connection here before. And then we've got the sentence here about being the last humans on Earth. I would say that connects quite well to this extreme isolation. Okay, so I would say here 44 is definitely our answer here, B. Right, okay, let's carry on to the next part. And we can see here that we have a reference to the Galapagos of the South. Perhaps there is a lot of wildlife like at the Galapagos in the Pacific. Okay, let's just read through quickly. Over the next few days, seals, penguins, and a host of seabirds are a constant presence. As in the Galapagos Islands, some species are abundant. There are an estimated 100,000 seals, 4 million penguins. Though hunted in the past, these days, the main threat to the island's fauna comes not from man, but from our legacy. Okay, let's just read here afterwards. Unaccustomed to the herbivore's teeth, the island flora has been overgrazed and reduced to stubble. The hills, the plateaus are pockmarked with holes, and soft surfaces are undermined by their burrows. Right, okay, so we've got information here about animals, okay, and then we've got this information here that the animals are in danger, not because of man, okay, but because of something that man has done, which will give us a legacy, okay? Then we've got reference here to herbivores' teeth, and then we have information about there, okay? So this information here, again, is probably going to be relevant to this gap here, okay? Now, when we get to this part here, our options are sort of really quite limited because we've answered quite a few possible, we've answered some questions before. We've got A, which we haven't answered, B, C, and D, we've already answered, and E and G. So our only possibilities are A, E, and G, okay? And looking through quickly, I'm going to have to say that A looks the best possibility, okay? Why? Because it talks about rabbits, okay? And the rabbits will definitely give us herbivores, and it would definitely give us this idea of burrows, okay? Because rabbits underground, they live in burrows, okay? So A looks like a good possibility here. And then the question about legacy very much fits in with this, introduced in 1877 as a food source, okay? This is something that man did, okay, at this time, because they thought it would be a good idea to have these rabbits as a food source, okay. It was a mistake, okay, and it caused many problems. Again, if you look at Australia, they did the same thing, I think probably about the same sort of time, and it caused a great problem because the rabbits took off, the population exploded, and they could not be controlled. So this very much fits in with the question about legacy. Okay, the question about rabbits fits well with the herbivores and their burrows. So I would say A definitely fits in here for 45. Okay, and then in 46, we're only left with two possibilities. We know it's either E or G. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out the last question here. What did we get to here? On this treeless island, the overgrazing has also left the homes of native birds exposed. Petrel and albatross chicks are thus more vulnerable to predation and the harsh elements. The devastation reached such a point that in 2007, the World Heritage Convention discussed whether the island should lose its World Heritage status. Okay, so we've got problems to the wildlife here. Okay, then it says, however, the status was also conferred because of its outstanding natural beauty and aesthetic importance. Okay, so let's just go back and look a little bit more. So petrels and albatross are seabirds. Okay, it fits with what it says here, native birds. Okay, and that these birds are vulnerable to predation and the harsh elements. Okay, the devastation reached such a point that this particular convention discussed whether the island should lose its status. Okay, so status is mentioned here after, before and after. Okay, so let's look at our possibilities. The resultant landslips have devastating consequences, harming the penguins, destroying nest sites, damaging wilderness. Okay, Macquarie achieved a listing 10 years earlier. Recognition of the fact that it was a geological freak. A freak is something which is unusual, okay? And it's unusual because of how it was formed, okay? Islands are not usually formed this way. They're usually formed from volcanoes in other ways, okay? Not through the movement of tectonic plates, okay? So what we would say here, what is it going to be, E and G? Well, I'm going to have to say that it fits better for G, and specifically because of listing. Okay, if we go back, this particular World Heritage Convention, they would need to make a list of islands that have this particular status. Okay, and that in 2007, they were talking about whether it should lose this status because of problems that these animals might have. Okay, so that perhaps fits in here. Okay, but then perhaps as well, it fits well to the end, because of this island is a geological freak. It's an unusual island and how it was formed, okay? And so this may well fit now with this contrast. However, the status was conferred because of its natural beauty and aesthetic importance. So this may well fit now in relation to this last part here, okay? It doesn't really fit, E doesn't really fit here because of damage caused, okay? So G here definitely fits in here at the last question for 46. Okay. Right. Okay. So that's a question for gap word text. Okay. We've gone through that particular question. We've looked at sort of possibilities. We've talked at reasons why. Okay. And this is what you really need to do when you're doing your next gap text, thinking about what connects before, what connects afterwards. Okay. Is there a connection with the language? Okay. You can see here that when we're going through it, there was connection to pronouns. They was referring back to the animals that we talked about in 41. Okay, there was connection sometimes to do with context and how it fitted with what they were talking about. We had these words like later, next morning. Okay, there was also connections with things like however and contrasting of language. Okay, so have a look through and think about those sort of questions. The next time you're looking at it, The difficulty of something like this in the exam is that really you're having to do this within sort of 20 minutes, okay? So you have to sort of practice quite a lot, okay? But if you practice, I would say, well, this question is not that difficult, okay? So thanks very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll have a look at another video another day.